The crackling fire provided warmth across Gark's bulbous frame, the snapping wood competing with sound of drinking and eating as members of Gark's tribe continued to enjoy the plunder, so generously provided by the bastard children of chaos after their battle with the Beastmen. Gark knew he should be out there drinking and eating double his fill, as his role as tyrant would demand, but he felt odd as he watched Braca shudder in pain as the older she-bulls gathered around her, providing their wisdom and loud words. Gark knew he was not welcomed here, but something cold and icy kept him in place in the corner as he watched the other she-bulls feed Braca as she continued to yell in pain, which reminded him of how he might have sounded during the battle earlier that day. He wished he was back there, even when that horned bastard spear pierced his gut plate, nearly gutting him. Compared to watching this, at least the battle he knew what he was supposed to do. Raw orders, kill anything smaller than him, and eat, but here, on this battlefield, he was useless. You should not be heir. This is not a place for bulls, even a tyrant, Gark Thunderheart. The throaty voice of his tribe's butcher Grimmer the Scowl, said, her sunken eyes heavy with sweat. Gark felt his blood turn to fire, tightening his grip on his large thunder hammer. He knew he could rip off the butcher's arms even without it, but she was probably the one Ogor in the tribe that can talk to Gark in such a manner. Even his own band of mates in the Iron Guts knew better to wake his anger, but her position as butcher and her connection to the gulping god gave her some wiggle room. Gark did not reply, one of the few lessons he remembered during his travels as a man-eater, recalling all the times knowing when to keep one's trap shut kept him alive when dealing with manlings, stunties, and knife ears. The butcher's head snapped back with alarming speed, the fat around her neck jostling as she roared to Braca, "Push, you damned bitch, get that bastard out of there, girl." Braca roared up her maw, snapping at Grimmer, who pinned the she-bull down with the help of several Noblars, the small green creatures, who were straining to keep the leather bindings restraining Braca in place. Finally, the sound of flesh being torn, a mouth-watering sound in Gark's mind normally, filled him with icy fear, as suddenly a small shrill sound pierced the air. Gark felt his gut churn as he remembered the last time he was standing here in this place, the small, gutless body held in Braca's arms as it refused to nurse. He had made all the offerings this time, though, before the battle to the Great Maw, dedicating each swing of his hammer and bite of his jaw that ripped into the hairy flesh of the beastmen who upset his god's palate by offering this place to their creepy, spiky gods. The second shrill sound filled him with some sort of sensation. He did not know the name of it, but it felt like when he drank over his fill of stunty brew, bright and warm. "Good for you, Gark. Another whelp born on the move this season. Maybe we will be lucky and this one will be the one to do you in," Grimmer said, letting her nobler helpers lick the thick blood off her hands. Gark didn't retort, only watching as the whelp suckled eagerly on Braca, whose face was no longer contorted in pain. "You're a tough one, Braca. Make him strong," Gark said, looking over his mate's form, who was already looking to shield the whelp from Gark, as it was not unheard of for some tyrants to eat their potential rivals even if they be from the same brood. He turned to make his exit, but Braca's commanding voice stopped him. "Name him, ye fat head, this one's living, I can tell." Braca said, her eyes challenged his own, reminding him that there were in fact two she-bulls who can give him lip, without him being able to smash their brains in. "It's a bit early, girl. Most whelps don't survive past a season, and most she-bulls don't even name them at that point." Grimmer interrupted as she collected her various tools back into their respective sheaths, either on her belt or in the specialized areas of fat located on her body. "Dis one's special. Look, he's still hungry, and won't shut it even when I'm feeding him," Braca said, bragging about her whelp, like how a bull would show off a fancy new club he made or plundered. The two she-bulls eyed one another. A challenging smell went through the air as the mood turned nearly violent. Gark was hoping to sneak off, as even the hardiest tyrants knew better then to get in between two she-bulls feuding, but Braca's eyes held him in place. Gark grunted and said deeply, "The gulping god heard and answered my offering, so Gark struggled, trying to remember all the names important to the Great Moor. Call the runt Scrake, that sounds about right. Gark said, finally turning his back to Braca and Grimmer, able to relax as he left the tent flap, as he made his way toward the great moor pot in the center of his tribe's encampment. He was confused by Braca's insistence in naming the whelp. No one big and important cares about a bull until he gets a big name to slap at the end of it. But she-bulls were crazy, everyone knew that, but damned did they scare the meal out of Gark more than any opponent he has faced. Most of the tribe, he figured, was near the central fire, or at the very least, the most important bulls. He made his way over, his lumbering frame encased in thick iron bands of armor beaten together, from armor he has taken from other challengers and enemies, he has beaten to the mud and made their way into his gut. His gut plate was patched using some of the collected metals of the beastman warherd, the simple design of crude lightning bolts eating his guts, bearing his tribe's standard better than any manling's flags. His gut had shattered the spear once it had pierced through his gut plate, snapping off between his flap and only cutting fat. Gark would have to give his tribe's firebelly Volost a throttling for making his plate weak enough for a measly spear to break it. But other than that, Gark was pleased that, unlike last season, he wasn't rushing to hide his shame, and instead was going to bully his way into some grub. Suddenly, a howl that struck the air was heard from his sharp ears as Gark instinctually unshouldered his thunderhammer as he readied himself for an attack. The silence that came did not unnerve him as he breathed it in, smelling the husky smell of dried blood and bone. The sound of claws scraping the icy mud, moving slowly inch by inch, reached his ears. The joy of lifting his hammer over his head filled his gut with a rumble as it loudly demanded to be satisfied. They came suddenly, the three of them, as they bounded roaring, as their grey, skinny forms moving like the ghost men of Shyish he heard of during his travels, moving with speed that boggled Gark's slow mind. He felt his great saber-tusk cloak get shredded by gnarled, clawed hands. Gark swung his thunderhammer downward, pulverizing the torso of the first gorger, who exploded in a shower of flesh and gore. Gark left his hammer in the sludge, his instinct warning him that even with his immense strength, it would be too slow to counter the gorger pack. The one behind him had clambered onto Gark's back, his claws trying to seek purchase through Gark's thick armor. The one in front of Gark hesitated, the sight of exploding blood and meat, distracting the ever-starving creature long enough for Gark to get one of his iron fists onto the muzzled neck of the gorger on his back. The creature howled as Gark's grip became a vice, his thick fingers running warm with the blood of the gorger. Throwing the gorger with all his might downward, his arms straining the several buckles that kept his gauntlets in place, as he slammed the creature like he would his thunderhammer, flinging the gorger, whose own height matched his bulk, like he would a gnoblar. The two creatures collided with the sound of snapping bone and mashing meat, creating distance as both were sent into a flailing mass, allowing for Gark to retrieve his thunderhammer and bounded forward toward their writhing forms. His mood was rapidly improving as he felt his gut churning loudly, its own roar matching his own. As he swung downward, a red mist clouded the immediate area as the crackling power of the thunderhammer resounded across the camp. The sight of blood and carnage caused Gark's gut to rumble, and he saw no harm in a little snack before heading over to the big fire in the center of camp. Gark reached down, grabbing one of the pulpy limbs of the top gorger, stuffing his maw with the stringy meat. It wasn't good, but at least it was earned, and it was fresh as he munched on his meal. A sound came from underneath, catching Gark off guard, a pathetic whimpering that caught Gark's attention, which was a challenge considering that he was busy filling his gut. But it was the softness of that mewling that was strange for Gark, a sound that reminded him of manlings begging or knife ears, speaking a nearly alien language to Gark's ears. Gark shifted his weight off suddenly, as he felt himself flinch as the gorger on the bottom had survived, though its chest had been caved in and one arm mutilated. Even then, the creature only began to stuff his craw with the remains of its packmate, ignoring Gark. Gark knew he should end the creature's pitiful existence, But he hesitated as the red-eyed creature met his own, the ever-present hunger, a bond shared between the two of them. It was an affront, a monster told to whelps by she-bulls, warning about not eating enough or they will turn to gorgers, forever cursed with to find no bottom of their hunger, to find no satisfaction in any meal, the taste of ash replacing any other taste, an existence of scavenging and hiding behind any more tribe encampment. Gark went white-knuckled as he readied his hooked iron fist, but again he hesitated as that sound returned, that damned mewling weakness. "Fuck," Gark said, his guttural curse causing the creature to pause in its meal, and it began moving away from him, afraid that Gark will end its existence. Gark allowed the pathetic creature to leave his sight, watching the gutless creature moving like a limping shadow. Gark was prepared should that creature enter any of the tents of the she-bulls. He would have bounded over and ended the poor creature's life, as even his leniency, his weakness could only go so far. Gark stooped down, hoisting his thunder hammer on his back single-handed as he picked up another limb munching on the severed appendage as he tried to distract himself from that mewling that still plagued his empty head. "Still a softy, eh, Gark?" Grimmer the Scowl said, causing Gark to sigh as he stuffed the remains into his maw in a rush. "Shut it, Grimmer. I already got the one headache, don't need another." Gark said the irritation of his broodmate was not something he wanted to deal with at the moment. "Deal with it, you da big fat tyrant, Gark Thunderheart. You's got to be strong enough to deal with a loudmouth butcher spouting wisdom," Grimmer stated in a mocking tone like a messenger noblar bred to recite big names for especially braggart tyrants. "Is that what you call it? Then speak your getting in between me and a meal, Grimmer," Gark said harshly, but his mood was already settling, as his older broodmate always was able to piss him off and cheer him up in equal measures. "You're lucky it was just me watching you. You know how the other she-bulls talk like knife-ears to each other. Can't have the tyrant showing softness after getting jumped. You would have half your drinking mates challenging you by sun-up and half the young bulls by next sundown," Grimmer said, the nearest to concern her deep voice could manage. "Gark, you ain't getting soft, are you?" she asked, her concern going beyond Gark, as she was responsible for the tribe as much as he was in her own way. Gark wondered if this is how his pa felt near the end, old, tired and hungry, but that old codger had nearly ran the tribe to the ground. Gark was old. His time spent travelling outside of Gur were his good old days, but none of his crew had made it back with him. So Gark returned only to find his tribe dwindling and his pa old and tired. Gark challenged him then and there. Afterwards, Gark has spent most of his tenure on the moor path with starving whelps who he has turned into proper bulls now after some time. The tribe had survived, but Gark was still a nobody from the sticks. The only one big name he had earned, Thunderheart, came from disposing his pa, as his heart had roared, filling the camp air like a war drum. Gark smiled toothily at Grimmer, the same hungry smile he wore when he toppled his pa that day so long ago, the sign both an encouragement and a warning, a baring of one's fangs. "Nah, Grimmer," he said slowly, nearly growling at her. "I'm still hungry for a whole lot more. Now get out of my way, I got a meal to eat," Gark said in his low voice, noticing the worried look of Grimmer ease as she saw that look in his dull eyes, that will to take what you want when you want it, and the power to follow through. He heard her loud steps behind him, and they headed to the blistering heat of the moor pot, fighting off the ever-freezing air of the realm of beasts.